Begin. We'll begin with our lecture with the arguments that Northrop Frye has put forth when he is talking about the archetypes of literature. Yesterday we discussed about the four phases that he mentioned, and in these four phases he discussed about the solar day, the seasonal cycle, the human cycle, myth related to it, the human support to it, and then he talked about the archetypes in it. All these four phases have pointed out about its development of myth and archetype. Even we have discussed why myths are important, because the myth is the central informing power that gives archetypal significance to rituals and archetypal narrative to the oracle. That's why myth is the most important part that Fry is talking about. Then yesterday we also discussed about some caution that Fry has given to us, some words of caution and encouragements. And he talked that what literary criticism is expecting all about, and how literary criticism has framed its boundaries, and what are the mythological contract he talked about. He also talked about that there need to be in future handbooks of criticism, the outlines need to be given very clearly with giving up their titles. And the second phase of criticism we discussed about how using psychology and anthropology, the advanced branches of science, how are we going to frame literary criticism. And the critics who deals with the material of psychology and anthropology, for some time they appear to be a dilettante of those subjects. So he talked about the two phases of criticism which are largely undeveloped in comparison with literary history and rhetorics, and the reason being the latter development of the sciences they are related to. We have talked all those things yesterday. Now moving further, taking this argument further, Fry is pointing out, Fry is discussing about how the critic needs to study the principles of literary criticism, and what happens usually when a critic studies principles of literary criticism. In any case, the critic who is studying principles of literary form, he has a quite different interest from the psychologist's concern, and psychologist's concern is always related with the states of minds, or anthropological's concern with social institutions. For instance, what Fry is saying, that usually the mental response to narrative is mainly passive. What narrative is saying, what narrative is bringing out, what narrative is discussing about, all those things are passive. Mental response to narrative is passive, and mental response to the significance is active. When you are finding out the meaning of the text that you are reading with, if I'm making it simple for us to understand it, if I'm making very simple to know us that how Fry is talking about, if we look into the narrative is always working in a passive tone in our mental operations. And when we try to find out the meanings of the narrative, the significance of the narrative, your mind starts to work actively. So it is active. Now, from this fact, Fry gives an example of very famous Ruth Benedict's book titled Patterns of Culture. And in this book, Ruth Benedict, in Patterns of Culture, he develops a distinction between Apollonian culture and Dionysic culture. Now, if you look at these two terms, Apollonian and Dionysic, these two words are from Greek literature. Apollonian culture means the sect, the people, the society which follows god Apollo. And what is Apollonian culture? Apollonian culture is simply based on obedience to ritual. You are not arguing. You are obedient to ritual. Whatever rituals have been narrated to you, have been told to you, you have to be obedient to that culture that is called as Apollonian culture. And god Dionysus, so there's a Dionysiac culture, and Dionysic culture is based on a tense exposure of the prophetic mind to epiphany. And we will find out how Dionysian response, wherever you will find out to get from any play, it is going to give you a very tense exposure to the prophecies that is coming to. And these prophecies are creating a sort of epiphany. This is how Ruth Benedict has written in his Patterns of Culture. Because what Fry has claimed, what Fry has argued, that the mental response to narrative is mainly passive, and mental response to significance is active. And from this fact, he's trying to point out that how these two different cultures have pointed out almost a different kind of understanding. Now, if you are trying to be a critique, if you're trying to write down a criticism, your criticism needs to get the ideas very clear with the understanding of the culture that is used into the narratives. Fry further continues and says that the critic would tend rather to note how popular literature would appeal, because this is what you are talking about, a very serious literature. But what about those popular literature? Because there is a complete section in the society who is interested, who is very much eager to read popular things. And popular literature which appeals to the inertia of untrained minds. Because popular literature is always appealing to untrained minds. Popular literature is read by each and everyone who is not at all a student of literature. Novels are not simply read by the students of literature only. Popular literatures and popular literature which produces novels also can be read by most of the untrained minds who are not at all familiar with what exactly it is that literature wants to talk about. It is not a sort of training that they received out of, and that's why it, popular literature creates an inertia in unpopular minds and puts a heavy emphasis on narrative values, because they're putting values into it. And if you know that most of the Indian students who used to travel by train, most of the time you will find out the books, the popular novels are always available there. Even Dan Brown, novels of Dan Brown, most of the young people, they are interested in reading it. Jeffrey Archer, these are the popular novelists. Now, when you read any popular novel, this popular novel is always having a lengthy narrative, and this narrative is trying to inculcate some sort of values. If you are trying to, if critic is trying to note this, that how it puts a heavy emphasis of narrative values on untrained minds, this is one side that you need to know, that how this popular literature, because it is, why it is called as popular, because it has been read widely. People used to read it again and again. People are interested in reading those books. When people are again and again interested in reading those books, that means those books are very known, those books are very famous, and they are inculcating the narrative values on untrained mind. Whereas if you compare it with, whereas you will find out a sophisticated attempt to disrupt a connection between poet and his environment. Critic is always trying to keep the person out of the environment. Now, when you're talking about popular literature, you are talking about the narrative values of popular literature. But when you're talking about a poetry, you are forgetting to mention, you are simply trying to disrupt the connection between the poet and his environment. Because if some poet writes something, it is his ambience, it is his environment that is helping him to understand, to write down certain things. Fry here gives very interesting example of all the French poets and French writers. Arthur Rimbaud, Arthur Rimbaud, a very famous French poet, he wrote a poem called Illumination, which is a combination of prose and poetry. And Arthur Rimbaud, in his Illumination, is talking about something, a relationship between human mind and something, a relationship between life. The type of poem Arthur Rimbaud wrote, we have to understand in which environment he wrote this particular poet. What is the environment for the poet to write down these kinds of poetry? Or he's saying James Joyce's uh, solitary epiphanies. When Joyce was staying alone. The epiphanies, that solitary epiphanies that Joyce wrote. You have to understand the environment. Or Charles Baudelaire, Baudelaire's conception of nature that he mentioned in his French poetry. All these are a source of oracle. They are carrying some sort of oracle. They're taking certain oracle into their writings and trying to put it in the form of their work. Fry is interested in emphasizing that. And these people are trying to put all those things. You need to understand the environment in which all these people wrote these different things, because it is converting into sort of their own understanding of human nature. It is the role of the critic to understand it. It is the role of the critic to find it out. Fry also mentioned it deliberately. Fry also brought it very deliberately, that how literature, as it develops from the primitive to self-conscious. Literature developed from primitive to self-conscious. Literature was already in primitive ages, you will find out literature is there. From this primitive to the self-conscious understanding of literature, you will find out. Fry is pointing out this very categorically, that it is showing a shift in poets' attention from narrative to significant values. This is a shift in poets giving an attention to the topics, to the subjects that he is writing of. And this shift of attention being the basis, the shift of attention is the basis of one of the very famous German writer who wrote an essay titled Oberknife and Sentimentalisch Dichtung. Fry is giving an example of Friedrich Schiller, saying that this attention, the shift of attention, is the basis of Schiller's very famous distinction between naive and sentimental poetry. What Schiller says, naive, 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 denotes ancient or classical poetry, and sentimental denotes to modern romantic poetry. So if you look at naive, the distinction between naive to romantic sentimental poetry, you will find out the difference is paid in understanding of how this poetry, or how the poet from primitive ideas moved slowly towards self-consciousness. That's why he has given this idea of naive and sentimental poetry by Friedrich Schiller, written in German. This is how you have to find out a relationship of literature and how the critic needs to understand all those things, combining it together. If the critic is not able to understand it, if the critic is not able to know this, then the literature, the criticism that is produced cannot fulfill the category or cannot fulfill the ideas that what Fry is trying to say, that criticism is a sort of science. Now, even yesterday when we are discussing, we says that this epic, this mythic, these myths, they are simply trying to emerges from rituals, and later on this is converting into a encyclopedic structure. The encyclopedic structure is giving birth to sacred scripts of religion. So when you are putting criticism, when you're trying to build up a criticism, when you're trying to build up an argument in criticism, what Fry is trying to say that you have to understand the relationship of criticism to various things, as the relationship of criticism to myth and converting it into an archetypes of literature, where you are finding out that how myths are converting all these archetypes into it. Similarly, we have to understand the relationship of religion and criticism. The relationship of criticism to religion. When a critic try to deal with the same documents, the relationship of criticism to religion, when he's trying to check, when he's trying to deal with the same sort of documents, you will find out it is becoming more complicated. It is becoming more and more complicated. In criticism, or as in history, you can use in both the ways. In criticism as well as in history also, the divine is treated as human artifact. The divine is not something different, something aloof, or having some magical consequences, or having certain metaphysical understanding and metaphysical relationship of the world. No, for a criticism and history, divine is always an human artifact. You cannot say that the divine means something very different, away from out of this world, out of these ideas. No. For criticism and history, divine is human artifact. God, for critic, if you see it, whether it is in Paradise Lost, if you read Milton's Paradise Lost, God, Saturn, all these things are appearing in Paradise Lost or in Bible. For critic, all these explanation, all this reference, all this appearance of God into these books is something like a character. He treats God as a character of a book. He is not at all. He is a character in a human story for any critic. Whether God is appearing in Paradise Lost, whether God appearing in Bible, for critic, he is a character in the human story. And for the critic, all the epiphanies are explained, not in terms of the riddle of possessing God or devil. It is not for the critic. He is not at all. He is not possessing the whole narrative in the form of understanding with God and devil. For critic, These ideas are nothing but a mental phenomena. For critique, these ideas are mental phenomena. They are closely, these mental phenomena, which is closely associated with, you can say, with the origin with the dreams. It is for the critique, please understand, my friends. This once established, this is how once you establish that, okay, critique for critique, the divine figures like God are nothing but human artifacts, human characters, characters in human story. They are characters in human story. And it is a mental phenomena which is closely associated with their origin with the dreams. Now, once you establish this, once you put the things together that this is a mental phenomena, God is character in human story. Once you establish this, it is what Fry says, then necessary. Fry pointed out it is then necessary to say that nothing in criticism or art compels the critique to take the attitude of ordinary walking consciousness towards the dream or the God. What others are thinking commonly, what others are understanding, Fry says that for critique or in criticism or art, it compels the critic to take the attitude of ordinary waking consciousness towards God and dream. Because if you know everything, you are not saying that, okay, it is not like this, people will not accept your criticism. People will say that, no, this is not the way he is talking about. If you are saying that, okay, God is a character and all those things are there, if you know it is, the critic cannot, the critic has to take the attitude of ordinary consciousness. Fry says art deals not with real, but with conceivable, how you conceive it. Art is not at all related with real. Art is not talking about real. Art is something which deals with the conceived items. And if art is so, then criticism, though it will eventually have to have much or some theory of conceivability, it can never be justified in trying to develop, much less assume the theory of actuality. It has to be followed the theory of conceivability. What sort of things that has been conceived by the readers? What are the things that can be conceived out of this particular art? The critic needs to justify this. He cannot justify in developing any theory of actuality, what actually it is. He cannot justify it. So Fry is saying that it is necessary for a critic to understand this, this whole theory of conceivability, that art deals not with the real but with the conceivable. This is, you can say, in simple way to talk about theory of conceivability. What you conceive, and critique have to have some of the theory of conceivability rather than going for theory of actuality. And this what Fry says, that he is leading towards the final point to make in this essay. And what is the final point he is trying to make? He's talking about certain next and final point to it. What we did right from the beginning of the essay, we have identified the central myth of literature. Central myth of literature in its narrative aspect, with the quest myth, narrative aspect with the quest myth. Now, if we wish to see this central myth as a pattern of meaning, we have to start with working of the subconsciousness. We have to start to work with subconscious, where meaning, where you will find out the epiphany originates. What we discussed up till now, what is the central myth in literature, what is the central myth of literature, what, how it is in its narrative aspect. And if we wish to see central pattern, central myth as a pattern of meaning, we have to start with understanding it with subconscious, when where the epiphany originates. In other simple words, you can say dream. Epiphany originates in a simple word, you can say dream. We have to see in subconsciousness how the dream works. And that's why I think that in the last years, either in the first semester lecture or in second semester lecture, I have discussed with you, I have talked about how dreams are usually becoming part of our understanding. The human cycle, the human cycle of waking and dreaming, it is, it corresponds with the natural cycle of light and darkness. And it is perhaps in this correspondence, as its relationship, waking and dreaming is having a correspondence with light and dark, light and darkness. Now, in this correspondence, that all imaginative life begins with this understanding. Because most of the things you are doing, you're thinking of, those things used to take place when it is dark. Now, if you are able to understand this correspondence, that this waking and dream corresponds to nature's cycle of light and darkness, and it is perhaps in this correspondence that the imaginative life begins. The correspondence is largely antithesis. It is in daylight that man is really in power of darkness. It is in the daylight that man is really in the power of darkness, a prey to frustration and weakness. And it is in the darkness of the nature that the libido or conquering heroic self awakes. I'll make it a little bit easy for you to understand what Fry is talking about. Now, this whole human cycle, waking and dreaming, it is related with light and darkness. When you are awakened, it is daytime. And when you are sleeping, it is darkness. And when you sleep, you will have a dream. That means it has a correspondence, it has a link. When you are sleeping, closing your eyes, it is getting darkness. Open your eyes, it is light. Closing the eyes, it is darkness. It has got a correspondence. Simple thing to understand. But when in the light, there is, in the broad daylights, it is the power of darkness. Darkness means you are in fear. As I said you earlier also, that mind is divided into conscious, subconscious and unconscious. And when something happens to you in the broad daylight, a thing which is not expected by you, a thing which you are afraid of, the thing which you don't want to do, again giving a very simple example, that you are afraid of someone, some person, and he's coming in front of you in the broad daylight, you are looking at him, the fear, the power of darkness. The power of darkness is simply capturing you in a broad daylight. But when you are sleeping, when you are closing, when you are in the darkness, your libido and your self-historic, heroic, conquering the heroic self, it awakes, and you feel that okay, in your dreams you start to beat that man, you are angry with him. In real life, you can't. In a broad daylight, you cannot beat 10 persons at a time, but in a dream, you can beat 100 persons at a time. So in the broad daylight, you will find out that man is really in the power of darkness, and he prey to frustration and weakness. He feels frustrated, he feels weak in the daytime. But it is the darkness of nature, that the libido or the conquering heroic self, that you are beating the person, you are trying to get whatever you want, you are the king in your dreams. This self is awakened in darkness. And that's why Plato called a dream of awakened minds. Plato called art as a dream of awakened minds. In art, you are trying to bring out the imaginative life that you have seen, you want to live. You're trying to bring all those imaginary things into your art. You're trying to project all those things which are not possible for you to do in your broad day real life. You are trying to bring all those things into your imaginative life. That's why Plato is denying Plato is saying art is a dream of awakened mind. And he says that it seems to have as its final cause the resolution of the antithesis, the imaginative life, the mingling of the son and the hero, the realizing of the world in which the inner desire and outward circumstances are coincided with. Everything can take place in this imaginative. Good, bad, good punished, bad rewarded, bad punished, good rewarded. Anything can happen in this imaginative. You cannot say that this is not part of the imaginative world. Anything can take place into this imaginative world. And that's why Plato is not accepting this imaginative world. And this is the same goal. What I say, this is the same goal, of course. That the attempt to combine human and natural power, to combine human and natural power in ritual. Ritual has all this capacity to do this. Ritual is bringing these two things together, human and natural power. What art is doing is giving some sort of power to human being through, although it is in his imaginary life. The social function of the art, the social function of art seems to be, uh, you can say, closely connected with visualizing the goal of work in human life. What is the goal of human life? This is visualized in arts, and this is what is the social function of art. Makes you to visualize that okay, this is what your goal is, this is what you want to achieve is, this is what art used to give us. This is a social function of art, to visualize the goal of human life. So Fry says, in terms of significance, the central myth of art, the central myth of art must be the vision of the end of social effort. The the significance. What is the significance of the art? Central myth of art. What is the social significance of it? He's saying that it makes a vision, or it is having a vision to end the social effort, the innocent world which fulfilled desires, the free human society. So the myth, what sort of myth the art used to create? The art used to create the myth of end of the social effort. All the social issues and problems are getting solution into your narratives. All the problems are resolved into narratives. So the central myth of art is its significance. What is the significance? The significance is that the central myth of art is to envision the end of social effort, the innocent world of fulfilled desire. It wants to end this innocent world of fulfilled desire. It wants to end the free. It wants a free human society. These are the central myths. And once this is understood, that this is the significance of what you call it as central myth of literature. Once this is understood, then the integral place of criticism among the other social sciences in interpreting and systematizing the vision of the artist, it will be easier to see all those things. What exactly criticism used to do? It used to make it very easy to understand the things to you. It is the role of the criticism that makes you to understand the things very comfortably. You're trying to understand it very comfortably. And this is what the integral place of criticism will make you easier to see everything, interpreting and systematizing the vision of artist, why this artist has created certain things. And that's why Fry says it is at this particular point. It is at this particular point we can see how religious conceptions of final cause of human effort, religious conceptions of the final arts, final cause of human efforts are as relevant as any other to criticism. What are the religious conception? Religious conception is to make human society free. It is trying to end the social efforts, the innocent world of fulfilled desire. So, what is the role of religious conceptions? The similar sort of role you can find it out is with criticism. Fry is trying to put both the things on the same platform. Fry is trying to bring both the things together. And that's why he says that religious conceptions or criticism, they need to understand what exactly the human efforts, how it will end human efforts, how it will end the innocent world of fulfilling the desires. Because desires cannot be fulfilled all the time. But human is taking lots of efforts in fulfilling the desires. And that's why it is trying, what criticism is trying to bring out, religious conceptions are also making the same thing. That's why he says both the things are on the same platform. Now, what he wants to talk about all those things, how he talks about the importance of God and how he talks about the rest of the things in religion, we'll continue it in tomorrow's lecture. So I hope that we have talked a little bit of complicated thing that he is trying to bring it out as in relationship with criticism and literature. He is making it close to understanding of art, making it close to understanding of criticism in the format of religion, that it makes you to understand how, what are the causes of religion, how religion will bring the changes into human life. The same sort of things criticism can also able to bring it all together. This is how Fra is trying to bring out all the things in front of us. Tomorrow, in the concluding part of this, we will talk about how he's talking about importance of God and how he's concluding the attempt to see the central pattern of tragic and comic visions and confirming the archetypes of literature. We'll talk about all those things in tomorrow's lecture at 10:30. Thank you.